The British Empire was a group of countries and territories ruled by Britain. At its peak, it was the largest empire in history, covering parts of Asia, Africa, America, and Oceania. It spread British culture, language, and trade worldwide, but also caused conflicts, exploitation, and resistance in many regions. Eventually, most countries gained independence, leaving behind the Commonwealth, a group of nations that still maintain ties with Britain. So today, we are embarking on a journey where we will explore 5 countries that were occupied by the British. Before I start, if you are new to the channel or love history very much, definitely subscribe the History Facts Show and press the bell icon. Thank you. The British occupied many countries, the most famous of which is India. The British came to India as traders through the East India Company, which was formed in 1600. They set up trading posts in places like Surat, Calcutta, which is now Kolkata, Madras, which is Chennai, and Bombay, which is now Mumbai. Their goal was to buy spices, textiles, and other goods to sell in Europe. During the 1700s, the Mughal Empire, which ruled most of India, was becoming weak. Local kings and rulers, called princes, started fighting each other. The British took advantage of this chaos by making deals with these local rulers, offering them help in exchange for control over territories. The British defeated rival European powers like the French in battles like the Battle of Plassey in 1757. They also won major battles against Indian rulers such as the Battle of Buxar in 1764, which gave them control over Bengal and much of eastern India. The British were clever and used a strategy called divide and rule. They encouraged fights between different Indian kings, communities, and religions, making it easier to control them. They often helped one side win and then took over the area. In 1857, Indian soldiers in the British Army started a rebellion called the Sepoy Mutiny, or First War of Independence. This rebellion was crushed, but it scared the British. The 1858, the British government officially took control of India from the East India Company. This period is called the British Raj. The British built railways, roads, and factories, but mostly to take Indian resources like cotton, spices, and gold to Britain. They made laws and systems that benefited them and harmed Indian industries and farmers. Indians gradually realized what the British were doing. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and others started movements to fight for independence. After years of struggle, India finally gained freedom in 1947. The British took over Australia in a process that began in the late 1700s and was mainly driven by their desire to expand their empire, find new resources, and solve the problem of overcrowded peasants back in Britain. Before the British arrived, Australia was home to Aboriginal peoples who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. They had a deep connection with the land and a rich culture. In 1770, Captain James Cook explored the east coast of Australia. He claimed it for Britain and named it New South Wales, despite the land already being inhabited. In 1788, the British sent the First Fleet, a group of 11 ships carrying convicts, soldiers, and settlers, to establish a penal colony. They landed in Botany Bay, but it wasn't suitable for settlement. They moved to Sydney Cove, which became the first British colony in Australia. The British saw the lands as terra nullius, which is nobody's land, because the Aboriginal people didn't have fences or farming methods like the British. The assumption ignored Aboriginal ownership and sovereignty. The arrival of the British had a devastating effect on Aboriginal communities. They were forced off their lands, and many died due to violence, disease, and loss of resources. The British introduced new laws and often ignored Aboriginal rights and customs. By the mid-1800s, British controlled most of Australia, and 6 separate colonies were established. They governed themselves but were still part of the British Empire. In 1901, the colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Australia, but it remained a part of the British Empire. In the late 1800s, European countries wanted to control African lands to expand their empires. Britain, Germany, France, and others divided up the continent at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. During this meeting, Kenya became part of Britain's sphere of influence in East Africa. In 1895, Britain declared Kenya a protectorate, meaning they controlled its government and resources but didn't directly rule it as a colony yet. They wanted Kenya for its fertile land and strategic location near the Indian Ocean. The British built the Uganda Railway from the Kenya coast to Uganda to connect their colonies. This railway was important for trade and controlling the region. Thousands of Indian workers were brought in to build it, and many stayed in Kenya afterward. In 1920, Kenya officially became a British colony, meaning Britain ruled it directly. They seized large areas to fertile land in the highlands and gave it to white settlers. These settlers forced local communities to work on their farms. The British passed law to control African populations, such as limiting where they could live and work. After World War II, more Kenyans demanded independence. In the 1960s, leaders like Jomo Kenyatta united the country and negotiated with Britain for freedom. On December 12, 1963, Kenya gained independence and became a republic in 1964. Before the British, much of Canada was controlled by the French, who called it New France. They set up settlements like Quebec and Montreal. Indigenous peoples such as the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis lived in Canada long before Europeans arrived. In the 1600s and 1700s, Britain and France were often at war in Europe and their colonies, including North America. The most important conflict was the 7 Years' War in 1756 to 1763. In North America, it is also called the French and Indian War. The British, with help from some indigenous allies, fought the French and their allies for control over Canada. In 1759, the British won a key battle called the Battle of the Plains of Abraham near Quebec City. This was a turning point. By 1760, the British captured Montreal, effectively ending French rule in Canada. The British now control a region with many French-speaking settlers. To keep the peace, the British allowed the French to keep their language, religion, and legal system through laws like the Quebec Act of 1774. This created a unique blend of British and French influences in Canada. By the 1800s, Canada was firmly under British control. However, it wasn't a single country yet. Different regions like Upper Canada, which is known as Ontario, and Lower Canada, which is known as Quebec, were separate colonies. In 1867, Canada became a self-governing country within the British Empire through a process called Confederation. Before the British arrived, the Dutch controlled a part of South Africa called the Cape Colony. They settled there in 1652 to create a stopover for their ships traveling between Europe and Asia. The native people like the Khoisan and later the Zulu and Xhosa were already living there. Over time, the Dutch started to expand their land, leading to conflicts with the native communities. In 1795, Britain took over the Cape Colony for the first time during the Napoleonic Wars. They wanted to stop the French from using it as a base. The British gave the colony back to the Dutch in 1803, but returned in 1806 and took it permanently after defeating the Dutch at the Battle of Blouberg. The British brought their laws, language, and ways of life, which clashed with the Boers. For example, the British outlawed slavery in 1834, which upset the Boers because they relied on enslaved labor. In the late 1800s, huge diamond and gold deposits were discovered in South Africa. This made the region even more valuable. The British wanted full control of these resources, which led to tensions with the Boer states. In 1910, the British united their territories to form the Union of South Africa. This new country was under British control but gave more power to the white minority, leading to laws that discriminated against the black majority, setting the stage for apartheid. So, don't forget to tell us how you felt. What do you think about British Empire? I really want to know. And also let me know in the comments what British thing you want to hear about next. Thanks a lot for watching the full video. See you in the next video. Stay well.